Continue with sort of the Greek phase of Charles' work. But as we went around through the garden, you've seen a lot of religious themed pieces. And you're probably thinking, oh my goodness, Charles must have been this deeply religious man. Not really. I mean, he wasn't like, always into churches and attending every week, that kind of thing. But you have to remember, when was his period of work primarily? The 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, and churches were much more prominent in that era, particularly the Christian churches, and they had the money. And so they could commission these fabulous works of art. So one church sees a nice piece, another church says, hey, I want it, and so on and so forth. So that's why you see a lot of that. It wasn't necessarily due to Charles, although he would often say, there is a lot of religiosity in art. And I think he's right in that respect. So here we have Icarus. Icarus, you remember, out of Greek tragedy, he and his son are trapped in this maze, and they don't know how they're going to get out. And one day his dad says, son, I'm going to make us wings out of feathers and wax, and we're going to fly right out of this maze. But don't fly too close to the sun, because if you do, the wax is going to melt. Well, what's a dumb kid going to do? He's going to fly by the sun, and he's forever falling. So, this piece was actually commissioned by Phillips Petroleum Company. The final work was at least 4 times as big as this, and it sat outside their corporate headquarters up until about 6 or 7 years ago in Bartlesville, Oklahoma. And then they donated it to a local college where it's now on campus. One of the things I always like to show about this, all the bronzes are hollow. They're hollow for 2 reasons. One, if you made it solid, these things would be so heavy you wouldn't be able to move them. But second of all, remember, bronze is expensive. You don't want to waste it. And so you make it all hollow. It's only about 1/8 of an inch thick. Wow. In fact, it was about a little over a year ago, we had a gentleman on the tour who was a former student of Charles. And he said, our project for the whole year was to create a bronze. And he said, at the end of the year, we have all of our bronzes set up on tables. And Charles comes into the classroom, and he's there, and he's judging them and grading them. And he said, he came up to mine, and he said, young man, that is beautiful. He said, I've got to give you an A. And he said, I'm just so proud at that point. But he said, then Charles stepped up to the table, wrapped his arms around my sculpture. Stepped back, said, too heavy? It's a B. And he said he was right. He said, I didn't follow the instructions closely enough, and I wasted the bronze. And that's how Charles was. He was a very demanding instructor. And we've had grad assistants of his come through. And they said, oh man, some days I felt like I was a psychologist to the poor kids, because they'd get so stressed out from Charles' criticism, or they'd be crying. And Charles used to say to them, if you want to be a professional artist, you've got to learn to be able to take criticism. He said, because out there, he says, it's going to be a lot tougher than in here in the classroom. And so he was a demanding instructor, but he was doing it for their good.